Depending on when you have joined this overall movement of progressive medical and wellness science, and where you have learned, who you've been working with, the challenges that you've faced along the way, it's actually quite normal and certainly no shame in adopting some beliefs, some assumptions, some ways of showing up in the world and doing this work that are actually holding you back. We're going to do some truth telling today. Welcome to Functional Medicine for Real World Impact, where we're diving into the complex, interconnected nature of health and disease, exploring not just theory, but practically what it takes to turn functional medicine insight into powerful, practical, real world results. So please hit subscribe and let's get started. But I want to dive right in to the realm of limiting beliefs. And I'm going to start right away with some of, perhaps some of the touchier, more sensitive ones that actually have long been a part of practitioner belief in terms of the only way that you can successfully do functional medicine, the only way that you can really find the freedom, the capability, the flexibility to do this work. And one of those is the belief that you have to do it all yourself. Certainly there are many practitioners out there who struggle and can feel completely overwhelmed with the whole notion of, if I'm going to do this work, I have to do it myself because this science is unusual. It's atypical. As you learn more about functional medicine and begin to use it in your practice and talk about it and share the information, I have a deep compassion for the fact that all of us, to some degree, end up encountering some questioning, some challenging, even some outright rejection and ridicule from your colleagues who simply may not be open yet to seeing a science that they have long used in their practice simply through a different lens. As we know, functional medicine is built on the same old physiology and foundational biochemistry that medical science has been built on for many decades. But it takes a different holistic type of interconnected lens where no one part of the body is truly separated from others, and no one part of the body thrives without the functioning of others. And so if we're going to support one particular body part, one tissue, we must look at all of the different underlying functional balances or lack thereof, imbalances that could be contributing to dysfunction in a certain particular tissue that eventually will become severe enough to be diagnosable under most conventional thresholds. But because the science is different, because it's challenging, because sometimes doing this work can feel lonely. You feel like you're an island sometimes in the midst of a sea of people who just see things differently. You've had a wake-up call. It's almost like you've turned the lights on and you see your patients, you see your practice, you see the opportunity for providing the best possible good medicine. You see it differently. And it can be quite daunting to find yourself more isolated or even alone in a sea of people who continue to believe or work from the place that you used to. You have awakened to new possibilities and other options. But just because you feel perhaps alone amongst your community of practitioners that you have long worked with or associated with does not mean you have to do the work of functional medicine alone. In fact, the belief that you have to do that is a major cause of overwhelm. Just like the belief that you have to leave your job, especially if you're in a more traditional or conventional practice, the belief that the only way you're going to have an impact through the functional medicine lens is to give up everything, to leave your salary, your seniority, your security, the relationships that you value, maybe a patient population that you adore supporting. There's this belief that you can't do anything and you just have to wait until you're willing to risk it all and jump ship, if you will, in order to go and set up an entrepreneurial practice all by yourself. Oh my gosh, that would sound daunting to anyone, even the most assertive and confident of entrepreneurs. And certainly that is one way to do functional medicine. And I'm not in any way denigrating or criticizing that model, because courageous individuals' willingness to do that is the strength that has established the power of functional medicine. It's a strong foundation that all of our work now stands on the shoulders of, and I'm very grateful for that. that. But as we look now from our achievement of establishing the viability, the credibility of functional medicine, now to the much larger, more important task of how do we use that information to transform healthcare? How do we use that information to focus now on dramatically improving our clinical outcomes? So we have amazing case studies that we can collect and publish and get funding for groundbreaking studies that can step by step begin to change medical textbooks, to change the standard way we approach disease. Especially in the earlier stages, not just from a prevention viewpoint, but from an early engagement viewpoint, before things become severe enough to be diagnosable. But you don't have to do it all yourself. You certainly can, but you don't have to. And many individuals who are passionate about their practice simply don't have that independent entrepreneurial gene. That doesn't make you a lesser person or certainly any less capable of a practitioner. But we have to find the working models, the business setups and models that work for us. It's why at SAFM, it makes us very different in the field of functional medicine. We actually include an entire module that teaches about these different working models and the pros and cons of different ones, and how you can maximize your efficacy and your satisfaction and your income and your impact in a number of different models, getting away from this notion of one size fits all, but giving you an opportunity to start where you are, right? It's another limiting belief, right? I have to wait until I know it all. I have to wait till I'm certified, and then I will finally be credentialed. I will finally know enough. I will finally be able to credibly move forward and do this work. That's also a great recipe for overwhelm, because ultimately we can begin as we learn certain disease dynamics or certain physiological systems through the functional lens. We can begin from any working model. Anyone. And we support practitioners of all types and all origins to do this. You want to begin using what you're learning quite soon into your educational journey, because there is a huge difference between pedantic knowledge, scientific knowledge, and clinical know-how. There's a huge difference from being able to earn a certification, to get a credential, and being able to wisely practice. And the only way to get from A to B is actually doing the work. And part of that at SAFM we support by giving you case practice after case practice after case practice. More and more we want to encourage our functional medicine training programs to follow our example. Our students get the opportunity to use dozens of real life current complex case practices where you're not just learning a protocol, you actually have to put all the puzzle pieces together and figure out the case yourself, where you're not just learning information, you're using it. But we encourage all practitioners to take it even a further step to actually begin to use what you know in your practice. You don't want to use it before you've fully understood it and mastered it. Of course, no, we don't want to practice and be a true novice on our patients and clients' watch. However, we do want to, one topic at a time, begin to use what we know so that we can truly develop some wisdom. And most of us know, especially from extensive clinical practice, that there is a whole different level of impact and efficacy that you can have when you're not just knowledgeable, but you're actually wise. If we wait and we wait and we wait in order to do this work, in order to really get some confidence, odds are we won't do this work. It's not enough to just have knowledge. You actually want to be capable, which means picking up some of that wisdom, but you actually need to be confident. Another major source of overwhelm and frustration and what I call functional fatigue, which is epidemic amongst practitioners, is not being truly confident. Dare I say we can even have almost like an imposter syndrome type of struggle where we know a lot, but we're not really sure we know what we're doing. And this is, again, the difference between knowledge and capability. And so we have to practice. We have to do what we have learned. We have to put into clinical application what we have studied and absorbed. And so you don't have to do it all yourself. You don't have to wait till you know it all. You don't have to leave everything behind and jump ship and go to some other business model before you have a hope of doing this work. Especially now with all of the insurance reimbursement coding changes that were part of the blessing actually of the pandemic, at least here in the United States. You also don't necessarily have to stop accepting insurance reimbursement. There's all sorts of creative solutions today, different code scenarios. And this is another thing we teach, where you'd be surprised just how much reimbursement you can get for doing functional medicine in your practice. You not only don't have to jump ship and be an entrepreneur, but if you do, you can still take insurance. And using some creative types of coding, you would be surprised what you can get for reimbursement. If you add a combination of group programs to your one-on-one support, you can get even better reimbursement from insurance, which counters another limiting belief. The best way to practice is one-on-one, and I need to give each individual patient my devoted one-on-one time, right? Which is ultimately about trading hours for dollars. It's very demanding, and fundamentally it limits the number of people that you can support in your practice. But if you use group programs and group visits as part of your model alongside a targeted strategy for one-on-one support, you can actually get the best of both worlds, where you get what is a huge benefit of having a group, having a community to support individuals to make sustainable lifestyle change, which is so much better to do if they have the support of a group, the support of community. The community has a power and a wisdom that no practitioner has. Research actually shows that many people are able to make much better progress through the functional medicine lens in a group than they would ever be able to make with one-on-one support. But on the other hand, we know some degree of one-on-one is often necessary for certain patients in terms of being able to get more targeted guidance and being able to have that richer conversation that can bring to light key case details that give you the ahas that you must know in order to customize your approach to maximize your clinical outcomes. So we're busting myths all around here, right? These are beliefs that can be holding you back and certainly be holding back your ultimate clinical impact in showing up in this world and making a difference. Another really common limiting belief in the realm of functional medicine is that the practitioner is responsible for fixing the patient. Certainly, this is a role framework that has its roots in conventional acute or emergency care, which tends to be very appropriately quite practitioner-centric. And practitioner driven because of the obvious circumstances of the clinical encounter. But when you're supporting someone who is struggling with a chronic disease dynamic, especially one that is inflammation mediated, as so many of our disease epidemics are today, it is heavily influenced by lifestyle. And ultimately, your patients are not going to get the best sustainable health outcomes if you see your role as being at the center of the model. You are the driver and you are at the center of the model and you are fixing the person that who is coming to you for support. Because this leaves aside the critical aspect of the patient taking personal responsibility for changing their lives. And especially when individuals maybe find it challenging to change their lives. Maybe they've struggled. Maybe they need some customization. They need a more creative toolbox to change their daily lifestyle habits. Individuals will often keep looking for a new practitioner, a new lab work, a new supplement, right? Going to another supplement, right? It's this constant diversion and distraction of something new when they don't want to change their lives. And when we support them in that mistaken belief, we are ultimately holding them back, likely from their greatest health. Because we have learned that the best clinical outcomes result when the practitioner forms a savvy clinical partnership, right? Of equals coming together with different responsibilities in the healthcare encounter. You're going to be bringing your training, your knowledge, your wisdom. They are going to be bringing their intuition, their experience, and their personal responsibility for changing their day-to-day habits. It's also why it's so important that we rotate interventions with habit change, interventions with habit change, interventions with habit changes. Some functional medicine schools treat lifestyle or habit change off to the side, like it's a separate, small, ad hoc thing that, you know, if you have time, we can address lifestyle. But the reality is, customized lifestyle change is an essential foundation of success in every single case that you work with through the functional medicine lens. And it's not enough to tell people to sleep more or eat better or move more, or even to give them one single solution, right? Everybody should fast and for this long, and everybody should limit carbs and only have this much, and everybody should sleep and go to bed by this time. Everybody should drink this number of glasses of water. This type of general approach tends to not succeed at all, because you're talking about an individual who has a lifestyle with all sorts of constraints and preferences and contraindications and belief systems and family and relationship biases and needs. They need a framework, an environment in which they can work with you from a very diverse toolbox in order to find what works for them. And we have to hold them accountable for that. It's an essential part of functional medicine success is accountability. And also as part of that, celebration, right? Celebrating even baby steps is really essential for fueling a patient to continue the work. Even I personally, certainly many SAFM practitioners have shared this with us over the years, but even in our own practice, we see people who have been to really well-educated, well-credentialed, well-known practitioners. They've received a lot of lab work, they've received a lot of recommendations, and the net impact that they have had on their health is little to none. Little to none. And that's not because the person that they worked with wasn't smart, wasn't savvy, didn't have plenty of good insight, but the individual wasn't being supported in a savvy clinical partnership to actually do something to use that knowledge and actually have it result in dramatic, sustainable improvements to an individual's health, which, oh, by the way, will also get you some groundbreaking testimonials and social proof that you can use in marketing your practice from a real authentic place. And so it's not enough to do a lot of labs and tell people what's going on and recommend a lot of supplements. We have to help people get from that data to some type of actual outcome. And so education, inspiration, empowerment, community, these are essential aspects of the healthcare encounter. And in you actually having that amazing, gratifying, typically quite humbling impact on real human lives. Mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and poets and engineers and physicians and politicians and peacekeepers and all of these people who have these amazing gifts to offer the world, which they will naturally, through reciprocity, give more fully and generously when they feel well, when they feel great. And so this is a huge impact and a huge opportunity for you. We have to bust beyond these limiting beliefs in order to do this work differently. But I want to expand to actually talk about some of the more clinical types of limiting beliefs, and some of these you may be aware of and some of them not. We find that many practitioners who learn about functional medicine see all sorts of new possibilities in terms of remedies and interventions, but they bring with them the conventional, within normal limit lens with regard to labs. And as we know, this can be a real gotcha through the functional medicine lens, it's a reminder that normal ranges are not healthy ranges. They're statistical norms, which basically means 2 standard deviations from a norm. It's what 95% of the population within a given sample set presents with. But there's a huge amount of disease and dysfunction inside normal groups. If we're considering to be normal people who don't have a diagnosis, then my goodness, there's a huge amount of disease in subclinical levels biasing these normal ranges. And indeed, one of the things that we teach at SAFM is the importance of mastering your interpretation and utilization of everyday annual physical lab work before you ever use, much less begin to master through your education, the use of more esoteric and advanced functional labs, which are incredible technological tools. They're wonderful. But way too often we see people jumping to, oh, I need to run a comprehensive stool test. I need a food allergy test. I need a cytokine panel. I need an organic acids panel. I need a diurnal cortisol curve. I need a urinary toxin test. I need neurotransmitter metabolites, on and on and on and on. All of these can potentially be really powerful and really insightful. But too often practitioners are jumping to these labs without gleaning the basket of insights that are waiting for them in the annual physical labs that a person had just last month that was fully covered by insurance, and the data is sitting right in front of you. Part of this is because we are quickly glancing at those annual physical labs and nothing is flagged as being clinically high or low, and so we say, they're normal, you're fine. We joke often at SAFM in our practitioner community about you're fine becoming the other F word, right? Because how many people have you supported, if you're doing this work through the functional medicine lens, who have been told year after year after year, you're fine, your labs are fine, we'll see you next year, right? But when you look at their annual physical labs through the functional lens, you see all sorts of subclinical imbalances, right? You see disease dynamics at play. This is a powerful missed opportunity because you have the chance to engage before things have become severe enough to promote massive suffering and be diagnosable. My goodness, if we want to make healthcare accessible and affordable and truly effective, I think we would all agree that the number one thing we need to do is engage earlier with savvy and capability and confidence when disease dynamics are very real, right? They're not potential. We're not even talking here about prevention. We're talking about engaging early on before dysfunction has become more entrenched and more damaging so that we can actually reverse a disease dynamic and avoid a diagnosis. And that's an unfortunately radical concept, but something that we must transcend if we're going to maximize our clinical impact. And so within normal limits is a standard, a box, right, that we must bust out of and begin to start looking for subclinical suppressions or elevations of markers that many of them, you'd be surprised to learn just how many of them have been well demonstrated by research to be evidence of a disease dynamic. Things like fasting glucose, right? Depending on the normal range you work within, the entire upper half of the normal range may be evidence of some earlier stage of insulin resistance, that we don't need to wait the average 13 years it takes to become worse and manifest as formal type 2 diabetes. We can engage earlier. Or fasting glucose that is remarkably low or seemingly optimal for a person who has a standard American diet that's loaded with refined carbohydrates and maybe excessive carbohydrates relative to their activity level. And so how quickly we look and say, oh, fasting glucose of 83, 84, that's fantastic. But wait, does that make sense to you? It's within normal limits, but is it logical for this person? Well, through the functional lens, you start to understand that if a person has been dealing with so many sources of mental, emotional, or physiological or biochemical stress, that they have started to lose their natural diurnal curve of cortisol, in particular a loss of that cortisol awakening response that give us a strong peak within the first hour of awakening that naturally raises blood sugar. If people have lost that adrenal tone and they have a flat cortisol curve or just a blunted cortisol awakening response, that is making their first morning glucose look lower than is actually reflective of their typical blood sugar level during the rest of the day. Which is why if you were to measure hemoglobin A1C, perhaps their A1C is 5.7%, but their first morning fasting glucose is 84. Well, through the conventional lens, we may think, whoa, 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 those two things don't go together. They don't if we're just thinking about the impact of insulin resistance. But when we consider all of the other dynamics that affect metabolic function, it starts to make perfect sense. And we begin to question when a marker looks perfect, but it's illogical for this person. Sometimes we have two dynamics at play in a case. For example, mean corpuscular volume. Right, the average size of red blood cells. We know people can have a microcytic or a macrocytic dynamic. Well, if they are dealing with coincident deficiency of vitamin B12 and iron, may be secondary to some type of dysbiosis in the gut that's causing malabsorption of nutrients in the jejunum and the ileum, or maybe we have hypochlorhydria, like suboptimal stomach acid in the gut that's simply not optimally denaturing proteins or binding vitamin B12 with intrinsic factor and enabling it to be absorbed downstream. Those two deficiencies may present with a seemingly perfect mean corpuscular volume. And so we may say, oh, those nutrients must be fine. Not so. They may cancel out one another. We may have a suppressive dynamic at play along with an elevating dynamic, and they present as an optimal value. Functional medicine teaches you how to avoid missing that key piece of information, where you consider every lab marker in the context of who is this person? What are the puzzle pieces of their unique picture of disease? Within normal limit gotchas, liver enzymes, right? For example, ALT, AST, we can see these levels be low in many practitioners. I've seen this before, where it's in the single digits and it's circled with a big smiley face. Great job, your liver is so happy. Well, in that particular case, I couldn't disagree more, because overt deficiency of key nutrients like vitamin B6 actually impairs the synthesis of these enzymes. And so if the liver is wanting to repair itself, for example, wanting to turn over tissue and repair itself, maybe because of a lot of inflammatory oxidative damage, it is impaired from doing so. And so in that particular case, an especially low liver enzyme may actually be representative of not only a liver challenge, but maybe overt liver damage that we're not able to repair, because we have to have enzymes to do all tissue repair in the body. And this is where, of course, nutrition is essential and critically important. We have a lot of other limiting beliefs, right? Homocysteine is negative, it's bad. The less of it we have, the better. Not true, right? Homocysteine, when it's excessive, can definitely contribute to cardiovascular disease and atherosclerotic dynamics. But homocysteine is also an upstream raw ingredient to support the transsulfuration process that we use in order to make, for example, glutathione. You don't want to have rock bottom, barely there homocysteine, just like you don't want to have super elevated levels. But for that matter, we have other key nutrients that we think the higher the better, right? The higher the HDL is, the better it is. Not true, right? We know that as HDL levels get markedly elevated, especially in the context of pretty much any other existing inflammatory disease, HDL can become dysfunctional and actually lose its reverse cholesterol transport function and become part of the problem. Actually, with regard to atherosclerosis and other cardiovascular disease dynamics. We know that nutrients like minerals are great, but we also don't want those levels to be as high as possible. Certainly during the pandemic, we saw overtly what happens when people start taking high dose zinc multiple times a day without balancing it with other nutrients, because minerals compete for absorption at both the gastrointestinal as well as the cellular level. And so you could have really rockin' high zinc and you've managed to render yourself with barely normal levels of copper, which, by the way, is also essential for immune function. It's not just about zinc. So much of what is essential through the functional lens is about balance and seeing dynamics through the lens of a unique individual. And this is a skill you can learn to master, right? We think about vitamin D, the more the better. No, not true, for multiple reasons. One of which is it promotes more and more calcium uptake into the body. And especially if someone is taking high dose vitamin D supplements to drive vitamin D up as high as possible, and they already have high cardiovascular disease risk factors, or they already have a lot of arterial inflammation or loss of endothelial function, then absorbing more and more and more calcium is playing with fire in terms of increasing the risk of calcification of soft tissue. And so we have to consider, who is this person, and boost vitamin D intelligently. You can boost vitamin D so much that you create a magnesium deficiency. And so you start getting symptoms from vitamin D, which are actually just symptoms of having depleted your magnesium. More and more and more calcium is not better either, right? So again, clinical myths that it's essential we transcend if we're going to be able to help unique patients to actually get well and stay well. But I want to keep going because another one of the commonly overlooked limiting belief vestiges of conventional medicine has to do with medications. Now, medications are blessings. I just really want to speak to this overtly. I think there's too much tension in the world of functional medicine about, drugs are good, drugs are bad, and there can be a lot of infighting. But I think it's absolutely essential that we acknowledge that we are very blessed to live in a time today of some really impressive pharmaceutical interventions, technologies, incredible blessings that save lives, save body parts, help to sustain some degree of quality of life for individuals who are not interested in changing their lives, who are not ready, willing, or able to make change in other arenas. And so we're very blessed to have these tools. And the best of medicine is really about bringing together the various tools and techniques that are appropriate for your modality, for your license, for your trade, to bring them to bear in helping each unique individual to get the best possible outcome for their unique situation. And so there's a lot of limiting beliefs about medication. Certainly, a lot of practitioners in the functional medicine world are vehemently against all immunosuppressant medications like biologics, right? And certainly for any drug, they can be overprescribed, overused, inappropriately prescribed. People can use them for too long. There are always going to be pitfalls for sure, but especially in the realm of autoimmune disease. The blessing of having an individual be able to use immunosuppressants in order to keep inflammation under control, at least for a time, in order to save a body part, was absolutely essential for helping a person to step by step find the space in time, the space in reduction in pain and panic, the space from a holding back the inflammatory damage to actually address the unique drivers of autoimmune disease in their unique body. In that way, immunosuppressants can be an essential key puzzle piece of the overall interventional plan. And I've seen a lot of practitioners make the mistake of trying to remove an immunosuppressant immediately when they engage with someone who has an autoimmune disease. And of course, I think we would all agree that that's potentially really playing with fire but dramatically risking significant damage or harm, because it can take quite some time to actually dive in and step by step actually create regression of the functional imbalances that are promoting that chronic autoimmune damage. Now, is regression of autoimmune dynamics possible? Absolutely. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. But it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And most people have sought out support from a functional practitioner after, unfortunately, they've been suffering for quite some time, where they've exhausted conventional remedies. They've started to understand, if I don't get at the roots of this one autoimmune disease, well, the true scientific logical outcome is I'm going to get a second one, and then a third one, and maybe a fourth one. Because treating or supporting my victim body part in the context of this degree of immune dysregulation, it's not stopping the perpetrator, it's just taking care of the victim body part. But the dysregulated immune system is still alive and at large and wreaking havoc on the body. And so even while people are well managing an existing autoimmune dynamic, and even in the scenario where that tissue has maybe been damaged beyond repair, we must still promote the importance of getting at the roots of that immune dysregulation and creating sustainable regression, because otherwise the outcome will be additional autoimmune dynamics. That's the same perpetrator just keeps claiming more victims. And we know that there are certain gateway autoimmune diseases like celiac disease and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And so medications are not evil. It's like anything else in our toolbox. We need to develop the true capability and wisdom of using all of these tools and options wisely. Really essential, and medications can be part of that. But then on the other side, there are also oh so commonly recommended medications that we have lost sight of just how much damage they can do. And we're, instead of considering whether they're the perfect solution for this person, they become a go-to. And yes, even in the functional medicine world, I think we assume it for conventional practitioners, but even in the functional medicine world, there's still a lot of practitioners who go to NSAIDs, right? Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that we've well understood for decades are promoting overt erosive damage to mucosa in the GI tract. And this is creating anything from ineffective immune function in the gut in terms of lowered levels of secretory IgA to oxidative damage to villi that impairs nutrient absorption. Well, they can contribute to enhanced intestinal permeability. There's all sorts of dynamics that NSAIDs can contribute to. And this is a real vicious cycle in autoimmune disease as well, because they are frequently prescribed in autoimmune disease, and gut damaging and enhanced gut permeability is often already at play in autoimmune disease. And if we're constantly using an NSAID in the background, then we're never going to promote sustainable regression of that disease dynamic. The best we can hope for is to treat the disease, not actually to get at the roots of it and dig them out in order to create some sustainable cessation of that disease damage. Other things like proton pump inhibitors, yes, functional medicine practitioners still may recommend PPIs, right? Incredible damage that can be done by purposefully busting your digestion and creating hypochlorhydria. Anything from practically opening the door and welcoming an opportunistic H. pylori overgrowth, which damages the mucosa in the gastric cavity, to, as I mentioned earlier, impairing vitamin B12 digestion and absorption, impairing protein and therefore amino acid digestion and absorption. And when you do that, you're impairing access to minerals, which are so often conjugated to amino acids in our dietary proteins. All of these are risks. And so we need to be looking for these, not only not having them as a go-to in our practice, we need to be looking for and always asking patients and clients what they're taking. Always ask about over-the-counter medications. Always ask about what people used to take that maybe they've stopped taking. Especially anything they've stopped taking in the past 2 years that maybe they used to take regularly or even PRN, but frequently, could potentially still be of dramatic impact in the current state of disease dynamics. This is something we don't want to miss. Beta blockers, especially for stress-mediated hypertension. We may start working with someone who is using those, and we see it as protection while we're working on getting at the roots of hypertension. But are we thinking about the role of beta blockers in depleting melatonin, in depleting CoQ10, and how quickly that can absolutely prevent someone from having sustainable improvement in blood pressure, especially the impact on melatonin? Where we really need to be substantial melatonin secretors that allows us to be a big dipper and have a dramatic drop in blood pressure overnight that actually promotes repair from oxidative damage overnight. And being a big dipper overnight will actually rescue someone having some degree of elevation in blood pressure during the day. And so we have to be thinking about not just what are medications prescribed for, but what are some of the perhaps unexpected and indeed often overlooked consequences of using those medications. Another huge one, and this is one I want to spend a couple of moments on, is our obsession. And this is alive and well and common in the functional medicine world, I think courtesy of the blessing of so many wonderful comprehensive stool test options. When I was first introduced to functional medicine, comprehensive stool test was still a new thing that was being validated, and it was not as accessible. It was appreciably more expensive even than it is today. But now there's so many options that when people are struggling with almost any type of gut symptom, it is the go-to, almost the knee-jerk response of a lot of practitioners to run a stool test, which, as we know, given the process of acquiring it and getting the sample and waiting for results, is investing 3 to 4 weeks of time, typically investing $3, $4, maybe even $500, with the assumption that the lab is going to give you all the right answers. It's going to give you all the insights. And I got to tell you, you haven't lived until you've been so sure that a stool test was going to give you all the answers. And basically what you received was stool test results that pretty much didn't tell you anything new. It told you that this person has low to moderate multifactorial dysbiosis. There's nothing to treat. There's no novel pathogen. There's no parasite, right? There's no Dientamoeba fragilis. There's no virulent H. pylori overgrowth. There's no exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, right? And what we have to realize is that unless we intervened otherwise, the patient was waiting, just like you were waiting for this data, expecting to have amazing outcomes and amazing insights. And ultimately, jumping to labs as giving you the answers to everything that is at play in a patient can often be a mistake. It's a real limiting belief to believe that labs are the one largest, most impactful puzzle piece that you need in the actual practice of functional medicine. Yes, labs are really valuable, just like medications, but they can also be overused, inappropriately used, recommended at the wrong time. And in part because many of the people we support have dysbiosis. And even if we are going to address it, right, we're going to try and treat it, maybe with some targeted probiotics or prebiotics, especially if there's a history of antibiotic use. Maybe we're going to use some type of herbal antimicrobials or even stronger options. If we don't address the environment, the terrain, the circumstances that allowed the dysbiosis, it's completely illogical to expect anything other than recurrence, right? Of course, because if a person has dysmotility from hypothyroid function, if a person has hypochlorhydria because they're using a proton pump inhibitor. If a person has a buildup of gas and distension in their small intestines because of I don't know, E. coli, right? Translocated E. coli overgrowth, or maybe they have hepatic biliary congestion and they have poor bile function. And bile, one of bile's most important functions is it's an antimicrobial, to which some of the most important human commensal species are actually adaptively resistant to. Which is a fascinating concept. There's some really awesome literature you can review on that. But yeah, part of having good microbiome management is actually having good hepatic biliary flow and good gallbladder emptying. These are fundamental underlying functional balances in the gut that if we don't fully understand all of them and make sure they're all in place, it doesn't make sense to just keep treating dysbiosis after dysbiosis. The revolving door of stool tests, right? Because the environment, the terrain, promotes circumstances that naturally enable a pathogen to survive and thrive in the human gut, that naturally promote an opportunistic overgrowth of something like H. pylori in the stomach or Candida albicans in the intestines. These are logical, they are expected. And so we have to be thinking about functional gut imbalances. And too many practitioners have mastered comprehensive stool test interpretation, and they are not very capable or confident in being able to address the functional imbalances that enabled them in the first place. So in your practice, you just keep running stool tests and treating results, and nobody fully gets well and stays well. Not only is that not satisfying for your patient, but I have a lot of compassion for practitioners. That's deeply frustrating and disillusioning for practitioners because we want the fulfillment of seeing transformative, sustainable results in the people that we're supporting. And it's so essential that we master functional imbalances and how to resolve them in a sustainable way. In functional medicine today, we've mastered a lot about the gut that is very important, right? Sometimes there are pathogens that we need to effectively and aggressively treat and get rid of. We know that bowel movements are important. It's not just about comfort, but it's actually phase 3 detoxification, and being chronically constipated is dangerous. We know that taking care of the gut, the reason we talk about disease beginning in the gut is because the majority of the immune system lives there. And if you're going to help a person with the vast majority of inflammatory disease, you must master the gut. You must address optimizing the gut. And in that sense, learning to master the gut is essential, whether you are a hormone specialist or a metabolic specialist or a reproductive specialist. You must master the gut, because so much of what is influencing these other specialties begins and is exacerbated by what happens in the gut. We know that we should be eating real food, not chemicals. We know that digestion is not a given. Just because you eat a healthy food that's loaded with nutrients does not mean that your cells are savoring those nutrients, right? You are not what you eat. You are what you digest, absorb, convert to final forms, and get past the cell membrane, which is a much higher, taller order. But there's a lot functional medicine has well known and taught and practiced for decades now. But we've got to start focusing more on the criticality of barrier function in the gut and how what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. And increasingly, we talk about, leaky gut. We got to expand the conversation about the impact of leaky gut on leaky blood-brain barrier, leaky endothelial lining in your arteries, leaky lungs, leaky skin. These are also essential barriers where we end up with dysfunction, functional imbalances in the body, so often because of loss of a barrier that allows chronic amalgamation of environments that are not designed to be that overtly intermixed. They're not overtly compatible. As the saying goes, good fences make good neighbors. So we've got to start focusing more on barrier function, and not just in the gut, but in other critical cavities in the body. We got to start remembering that the mouth is part of the gut. My goodness, how many people think about dentistry as being a separate thing from medicine, a separate thing from healthcare, a separate thing from comprehensive functional medicine? If so much disease begins in the gut and the mouth is at the top of the gut, then yes, it does logically follow that a lot of disease begins in the mouth. And so we have to start mastering this, in whether it's about root canals or mercury amalgam fillings or dehydration, secondary to maybe low estrogen, poor mucosa integrity, but things that impair immune function in the mouth. The criticality of keeping good oral microbiome. There's so much that you can learn. What about motility? Oh my goodness, that's the lost stepchild of gut function, because we focus on digestion and absorption, and we know these are important, and we give the pancreas and the stomach and maybe even the gallbladder its due. But motility, we don't focus nearly enough on motility, especially on the multifactorial agents that influence motility. Anything from hypothyroid function to normal, well-regulated cortisol levels, to gastrin and cholecystokinin, to secretin, acetylcholine, vagal transmission, my goodness, and the number of things that stand in the way of consistent, appropriate vagal transmission that innervates everything the gut is doing. But motility is also about the enteric nervous system and serotonin, and the diversity of microbes in the gut. If we don't get at the roots of dysmotility in a unique person, they're pretty much not going to sustainably get over their IBS. It's just the truth. And so we have to learn to master these concepts. We've got to expand our basket, keep beginner's mind, and continuously learn and go beyond some of these sort of classic go-tos through the functional medicine lens. And I think most importantly, parasympathetic nervous system mode. I'm going to end on this one point because I think it's another limiting belief, but in large part because it's often overlooked. I think one of the biggest truths that we must embrace as practitioners is that all healing happens from a parasympathetic nervous system activation. It's a really essential truth to teach your patients and clients, because so often when people are suffering dramatically, they take time out. In many ways, they're forced to take time out of their busy lives because they feel crappy, right? Because they're suffering. And so they rest. And then as soon as they feel able to, they get right back to the very environment that promoted them being sick in the first place, which is a powerful truth. Illogical though it may be, it is often overlooked. And I believe practitioners have a particularly powerful opportunity to teach patients about the misstep in this assumption because of the unnatural authority and trust that they give you as a practitioner. And so we have to teach people how to purposefully make day-over-day lifestyle choices to be more often in true parasympathetic nervous system activation. The average person we're supporting is spending an inordinate amount of time in more of a fight, flight, and hide sympathetic activation, and healing will not happen in that stage. Certainly some degree of management or stability of symptoms can be possible. In fact, the immunosuppression that naturally happens because of chronic stress can actually mean that there's less symptoms of an infectious dynamic, because so much of symptoms in an infectious disease is just evidence of the immune system fighting it really hard. And so there can be a really insidious type of dynamic in the background when people are living and working with chronic stress, right? Go do, more, now. And then they finally rest, they finally go on vacation, and then they get really sick because their body finally felt that the war was over, that it was safe to get sick. that they didn't have to fight for survival as a number one priority each day. This is a concept that most sociocultural norms in the communities we practice in don't support. They just don't support. As soon as people can get back to following what everybody else is doing, which is largely sympathetic activating, they do it. And then they wonder why, well, I felt better for a while and then 4 months later I was sick again. Or I felt so much better and then this happened and then I had a terrible flare and then another one and then another one and I'm right back where I was before. This is where we must teach people how to take ownership for their health, to take ownership for their nervous system state, to teach them that their body's not working against them. Their body is doing the very best it can to help them to thrive in the environment in which they have asked it to live right now. And if we want the body to choose a parasympathetic activation, we have to behave in a way that makes it safe for the wisdom of our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system. We have to make it safe for our nervous system to make that choice. Our nervous system, especially in cahoots with our immune system, has to believe it's safe to do so. And this is about our behavior. Actually, I think one of the most important pieces of education is about teaching people that a major source of stress, as far as your body perceives it, is that relentless voice in our heads. That, of course, our own nervous system is eavesdropping on all the time. You can imagine, right? Your neurons talking to each other. You know, it seems to be, she's trying to convince us that things are calm and, we're making some choices to do some things over here. But I got to tell you, every time I pick up the phone and listen to our thoughts, we're freaked out. We're worried. We're stressed. We're ruminating. We're angry. We are terrified, right? All of these things. And so I'm going with the voice in the head, right? So often people may make superficial changes in their lives on the outside, but their thoughts, their self-talk, their beliefs, their self-perception, all of these are incredibly stress-promoting. And so their inner world reality, despite the appearance outside, is very much sympathetic activating. This is an aspect of comprehensive care that functional medicine must embrace, that practitioners must embrace. This must be within the scope of care if we are to have a hope of not just treating diseases, but helping people to truly get well and stay well. So that's it for today, but I thank you all so much for taking the time today in order to raise your knowledge, not just your scientific knowledge, but your know-how, right? Your clinical insights that ultimately bring true confidence and wisdom, which is absolutely essential for you to be able to do this work long term, certainly with challenge, but also with ease and confidence and a strong feeling of empowerment that will enable you to be a true leader in healthcare transformation for years and years to come. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.